Hey, everybody. Interesting topic today. We're talking about the power and benefit of multi-cloud networking and a brand new approach here from Prosimo. Ramesh, how are you?
Very good. Thank you for having me here, Evan.
Well, thanks for being here. This is a topic that's really of interest to my audience and many in the enterprise networking space. We're going to dive in, but maybe introduce yourself, your team, your mission at Prosimo.
Absolutely wonderful. Nice to meet you all. Ramesh Prabhakaran, co-founder, CEO of Prosimo. In the networking space, this is my second stint at a startup. Previous one was Viptela in the SD-WAN space. It was a great ride up, and then after a brief stint at Cisco, got Prosimo off the ground. We're about a little over 4 years now. Lots of large enterprise customers, and living the dream in the startup.
That's brilliant. Well, tell us about, you have an amazing background and career. Tell us a little bit about your journey through the networking ecosystem over the years, and Juniper I see as well. What was the big idea behind the new venture?
Yeah, so it largely stems from the center of gravity shift, right? So cloud is has been, I would say, no longer new news. Cloud has been the center of gravity for quite some time, and when you flash back to probably about 5 6 years ago, is just kind of when the seeds of this started to emerge. It was a shift from data center to cloud as the center of gravity. Now, what that means is now you have to look at various kinds of patterns. You have two applications that are talking to each other. You have users interacting with applications, and now none of these things are going to the data center. They're all going straight to cloud or going from one cloud region to another and from one cloud to another. Right? And so we looked at that and said, okay, with that comes a whole bunch of connectivity problems, security problems, observability problems, a whole bunch of kind of infrastructure related things. And we looked at who's solving this problem. And we were selling SD-WAN at that time and looked at it and saying, okay, that's taking you from branch to cloud, branch to data center. But what's happening inside of the public cloud, really nobody's addressing. The hyperscalers really good at solving foundational problems, foundational building blocks that they provide to the enterprise, but nobody was solving the macro problem, right? So if I am trying to solve a developer velocity problem, for example, I get 14 foundational services from, let's say, an AWS or an Azure, but there is a space in the middle that's largely unsolved. And so that's what we saw as the unsolved problem. And then that led to starting the company. Fast forward to today, we provide a full stack solution that enables enterprises to essentially connect their applications with each other, irrespective of where they are in the world and which region they are in, and so forth. And at the same time, provide user to application access as well.
Brilliant. So you've seen all the approaches to solving these problems. How would you say you distinguish yourself versus maybe traditional approaches
Yeah,
that we see
absolutely.
out
And,
there
and
today at scale? Yeah.
yeah, now I wouldn't use the word traditional because we have been part of that, and so I don't want to downplay that. But no, there has been an earlier view that everything can be solved using kind of routing and
Hmm.
what the industry calls IP networking, right? That was largely true for workloads inside of the data center because you built the stack in a certain way. You had a 7 layer sandwich where you had kind of IP networking. You brought in additional capabilities with, let's say, TCP, proxying, and so forth, and then you brought a layer 7 appliance, and then you had firewalls, and then you had this, that, and the other, and before you knew it, you had like a 7 layer stack. Now in the cloud, things are very different. First off, in the cloud, IP means nothing because IPs keep changing. When IPs keep changing, IP networking needs to change as well. And so largely all the things that we have learned in the traditional networking world no longer apply in here. Also, cloud introduces a whole host of new type of capabilities. So it's not just I'm taking an application and building it there, or I'm lifting and shifting, or I'm creating a packaged application there, and so forth. I have cloud native services as well. So especially in this brave new world of everything being data and AI driven, you have foundational models, you have AI services, you have endpoints, and so forth. These are not IP endpoints anymore. Those are services, right? And so networking in the cloud is actually quite different. And so our approach essentially embraces that quite a bit. We don't just use IP networking, we use a combination of that and application intelligence along with what natively is provided by the cloud, and bring all that together to essentially provide what we call as full stack networking. So that's one thing. And the second thing we have seen is enterprises go to the cloud. Why? Because it's speed of applications, it's about developer velocity, and a whole host of things associated with that. And they want control. And so what we provide is infrastructure that sits inside the administrator's own control. So this is governed by the rules and compliance policies and so forth of
Mm.
the enterprise. And so they get extremely comfortable with the fact that this is a data plane element sitting in the path, processing a bunch of things and providing value. They can at moment's notice cut off access if they want. They can change. So all of it's not a black box. It's actually a white box that they have full access to. So it's a combination of these two things. One, very well aligned with the diversity of applications that cloud has, and second is entirely in their control.
I love that. Not a black box, a white box. I'm going to noodle on that for a bit. But you also talk about democratizing multi-cloud networking for the enterprise. I assume that plays into that theme. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so if you look at what are the hard problems to solve, the foundational connectivity pieces provided by the hyperscalers are pretty rich from that standpoint. So it no longer is the case that I need to have, let's say, a VPC here and a VNet there, or a VPC here and a VPC there that I need to connect, and that problem is largely a solved problem. So that's not where you or anybody needs to be investing your time and energy. That just needs to be available to you. So the hyperscalers have really done a phenomenal job at solving for those problems. And so we want to make that available to everybody. And so where customers struggle with is are not just simple connectivity problems, but the fact that you have hundreds of app teams all operating independently, free to use any kind of addressing space they like, and suddenly this cloud platform team that's in the middle catering to all of these application teams has like exactly the same addressing block coming from every single one of those app teams. And so it's an example of a problem that's not solved by the hyperscaler but has to be solved for the enterprise to be successful. Same with things like your cost visibility. So again, I'm dealing with multiple app teams, different workloads and so forth, and I'm using many of these foundational services provided by the hyperscalers. But how do I provide a cost visibility? How do I provide a chargeback? How do I provide forecastability in all of this? How do I do the optimization required and so forth? So those are largely unsolved problems that the enterprise has to either solve by themselves or use a technology like what we provide in order to solve. So to us, what we want to democratize is the foundational thing. Don't spend your time on that. The real problems are at a layer above. So we offer essentially a piece of our software for free. We put our money where our mouth is and say, you use that, right? And we have large enterprises, some really large Fortune 500 customers actually using that foundational block and saying, you know what, just that alone provides a whole lot of value. And then once you get into some of the sophisticated territory, whether it's with respect to scale, I move past, let's say, 50, 100 workloads to approaching, let's say, a few thousand and so forth, then your care abouts are different, the sophistication is different and so forth. Those are the real challenges that we want to solve for. Or you have diversity in your workload, right? You have an IP endpoint, which is very different than a Kubernetes cluster, which is very different than a serverless workload, which is very different than a VMware cluster, right? And so you need to be able to tweak your networking requirements to suit your application needs. Those are all the sophisticated capabilities that we bring into the mix.
Brilliant. So tell us what you see out there in the real world of multi-cloud these days. I mean, obviously you've got the hyperscalers, you've different regions of the world, you have many more options as well. Um, it's kind of complicated. So how do you simplify that exactly
Yeah.
for clients?
So if you look at the journey that most of the enterprises go through, in the beginning stages, it's about, hey, how do I set up a region so that it can connect back into my data center? How do I get certain level of automation, some repeatability, and so forth? To us, that's it's an important problem, but it's not where the real problems are, right? Once you move past that, once you bring a second region into the mix, or once your number of workloads goes past 20, 50, and so forth, some interesting challenges start to occur, right? Where I have to make sure that only some select traffic needs to go through a firewall, or I have IP networking where the IPs keep changing, or I need like PaaS services and so forth. Then a level of sophistication starts to change. And we are still operating at that time inside of a single cloud provider. When you bring an additional cloud into the mix, then the problem starts to become multifold more complex, right? Then I have to worry a whole lot, not about a single cloud, but also repeatability in another cloud. I don't want to deal with two different consoles, two different operating models. Operations becomes complex, and so on and so forth. So we peel the problem in layers. So we tell the customer, solve for a single cloud, single region first. then move to a dual region, multi-region, then move to multi-cloud. Because if you start with multi-cloud, you're never going to get there and solve the problem right away, right? So take baby steps to getting there. And also, even within that, the workload type and the diversity of that largely dictates how fast you can move. I'm sure you have enterprise teams and application teams hitting you with different types of workloads. Oh, connect this database to the serverless workload, and you're like scratching your head thinking, how do I do this with IP networking? You can't. You need cloud native construction in order to solve for all of this. So we take the customer through some simple structured journey so that they can achieve the end state that they desire. But when you reach that end state, actually many look back and say, you know what, I thought connectivity was the hard problem, and it actually there's just a means to an end. Once you crack connectivity, what that unlocks for you is really the huge value, right? Which is either with respect to cost, whether it's compliance, whether it's with respect to developer velocity, and so forth. Those are areas where you actually benefit quite a bit. Connectivity to us essentially is just a means to an end. It needs to work. It needs to work flawlessly, but that's just a means to an end.
You mentioned cost, and without getting into specifics, we're seeing a lot of cloud sprawl and SaaS sprawl. I mean, how do you see your solution contributing to cost management for enterprises globally?
Absolutely. Great question. So, the first question we ask is, do you have the visibility into, at least just purely from a networking lens, do you have the visibility into what resources you're using and how are they being utilized, right?
Mm.
And more often than not, the answer to that is a no, because you don't get that level of visibility. You don't get that visibility in a cloud provider bill. You don't get that visibility unless you put some 7 different agents and start measuring stuff and so forth. Right? So first, it starts with visibility. What resources are you using, and how are these resources being utilized by the various application teams and the owners that are operating on top of that. Right? Once you have this visibility, then there is a natural question as to what can I do with it. Right? So we classify this into, your resources are really utilized well, essentially it's very efficient, or there is cloud wastage, and there is a gray layer in the middle where you're inefficiently using those utilized those resources. So we take the cloud wastage and we say, don't bother, just kill it, right? Like, you don't need that because you just have like stale resources and this, that, and the other. So it's a layer of value. Immediately you can get rid of that. For the resources that are inefficiently utilized, the platform provides recommendations that, hey, you know what, you could be doing this slightly differently, and here are a couple of options that you can take, and so forth. So case in point, when I have to go from, let's say, one cloud region to another, I have multiple ways in which to get there. I can go over the internet, I can go over, let's say, an AWS or an Azure provided backbone, or I can hop onto my own enterprise network and then go from one point to another. Which is the right answer largely depends on what you care about. Do you care about performance, security, reliability, and cost? Then choosing one is going to give you two out of those four. You have to compromise on the other two, right? And so we help you make those decisions around what you really care about. What enterprises don't understand when they start this process is, there is a choice available to you on either an application by application basis or a group of applications. What they typically tend to do, because traditional networking has been like this, is you end up gold plating for the most stringent of application, which
Mm.
means a very simple approval app which does not care about a response time in the milliseconds ends up getting a millisecond type response. The approval app, it can approve after 5 seconds, nobody cares, right? But it ends up getting gold plated. And so what we provide essentially is the ability for you to slice your network very differently and say, okay, the stringent applications, the most transactional ones get this behavior, the most performant ones get this behavior, the ones that you consider as best effort, let's put them in a bucket. Like, don't eat into the cost associated with that, right? So that's the second layer of value we provide. Of late, in particular, we have seen a new person in the conversation called the FinOps guy. FinOps guy was somewhere in the corner of the room, and nobody was listening to about a year ago. But now we are seeing the FinOps person actually have a heavy voice in these conversations. And what that person cares about acutely is not just how dollars are being assigned, but forecastability. And so once you get the visibility into how things are getting utilized, and also you're able to classify, then naturally that conversation moves into forecastability and so forth. So those are all the things that we provide for the customers, all within the confines of cloud networking.
Amazing. A lot of variables there. I had on a recent show the creator, inventor of the zero trust architecture, and fascinating discussion. How does it apply to cloud networking solutions, and what does zero trust mean in your environment?
Absolutely. So interestingly, you cannot detach security and networking together.
Mm,
They both are two in a bag. To us, zero trust in the context of cloud networking means two things. One, when workloads communicate with each other, then you need to make sure that only the legitimate ones can communicate with each other. And so there's an implicit zero trust that needs to be built between those two, right? And so some take it all the way to the end and say, okay, this is micro segmentation, and so I want to make sure that only two entities that can and should talk to each other can talk to each other and so forth. Yes, all that is possible. Some go down the path of, I'm going to put things that are allowed to talk. There could be 20 of those things into like a segment, and then kind of deal with that appropriately, right? So it can, the answer can vary, largely depend on what you care about. So that's for the app to app path. And then the other path is the user to app path, right? Which means me as a user, I should not have to care if I'm getting a different behavior where I'm sitting in the office versus when I'm at home versus
mm,
I'm traveling and coming from an airport. I really should not be going through a different set of security principles, right? Security should work exactly the same way, because otherwise you open yourself up for a lot of attack. And so there's a whole bunch of user to app zero trust as well that comes into the mix. Again, all within the confines of cloud networking. So to us, essentially, that is a big part of the solution.
brilliant. Well, that's a fascinating take. You talk about autonomous multi-cloud networking, and beyond the marketing value in that, what is the role of AI in your network management offer, and what does that mean for the network engineer in the data center or the office exactly?
Absolutely. No, I'm going to take a very contrarian view on
Mm,
this and say, despite the fact that we love networking and so forth, networking should be a means to an end.
mm,
Infrastructure as a whole should be a means to end. That does not mean like nobody should care about it. Companies like ours and many software vendors should care about it and solve for these hard problems, but that's not what we want enterprise customers to focus on. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what do you care about? Are, hey, I have an application that needs to work. What all apps does it need to talk to, or what all databases does it need to talk to? Are all of those clear? Are all of those clean? And do they provide the best possible experience? Right. That's all you care about. For that application to work, that's all you care about. And the same thing is true for a user accessing application as well. That's all you care about. Am I getting the best performing access and wherever I am in the globe, and so forth. Underneath the covers, though, that translates into probably many different technologies that you shouldn't have to think too much about. And so the whole concept of autonomous that we embarked on was using the power of data, because when you do provide essentially an app to app access or a user to app access, it generates quite a bit of really useful insight, right? It's not just data, but insight. Using that insight, you should be able to make autonomous decisions. For example, if you're connecting from your home most of the time and suddenly there's been a change by your cable provider or your broadband provider and so forth, then we should be able to detect, the solution should be able to detect that there's been some drift and workaround, right? The same thing is true for any app to app path, right? When somebody has inserted a new security appliance unknown to the cloud networking team, and suddenly that comes in the way of experience. You should be able to figure those things out and work around it, and so forth. So to us, it is the day-to-day stuff has to be handled natively by the platform. And what better way to do that than using data? And in order to make data actionable, you do need to use machine learning and AI. So we resist for using words AI and ML right in the
mhm,
forefront, but they do solve some really hard problems. As an example, one capability we are building into the platform is you can just say, hey, how is my cross cloud behaving?
mm,
And just understand the gravity of that, right? How is my cross cloud behaving essentially means I need to know as an enterprise, where all do I have workloads in which region of AWS and which region of Azure and GCP. I also need to know what in those are talking to each other, and I need to know what the crossover points are, and I need to look at essentially all of those and figure out, okay, these are the ones that are not compliant and not performant, right? And so a very simple query to how's my cross cloud behaving will give you all of this information. Underneath the covers, whatever is required to crunch and provide the information is again something that we do, right? So we're trying to elevate the conversation from kind of foundational, oh, connect this tunnel to this router and figure out this IP address and autonomous system. No, yes, that's important. Like, yeah, we care about it. As geeks, we have to care about it, but the customer should not have to care about it. I actually really loved what AWS showed at reInvent through what they called as Q, right? They just said there was this one application example that they said, why did this application not why was this application not able to connect, right? And underneath the covers, that actually unfolds a whole bunch of things and be able to provide you with the visibility. But that's very myopic in scope. In the context of multi-cloud networking, there's a whole lot more that you can solve for.
Very fun, very smart, literally. So, what's on your roadmap, or are there any trends, opportunities, standards that you're looking at building into the foundation of the product this year, or what can you share as far as
Yeah,
direction?
no, we go by two foundational principles. One
Hmm.
is if you don't innovate, you die, and the
Hmm.
second one is paying customers drive roadmap. The second
Very
is more,
simple.
is more true than the first, right? No, honestly, we've been humbled by the fact that we have over 2 dozen Fortune 500 that are actively using our product and are giving us like new use cases, because this is unlike the standards world where everything was set in stone and you had to build towards it. This here, there's lots of things that we are uncovering, that lots of things that customers are uncovering, and so we are building things together, right? And so and that itself takes a life of its own. It takes an innovation life of its own. And so that some are in the areas of cost, some are in the areas of essentially providing the simplicity required for the operations, and some are just making sure that the experience that you get as a result of apps talking to each other and so forth is actually pretty good, right? And so we are pushing the boundaries, so to speak, on each of these, but that these are driven by customers, and we are working together with them. Outside of that, there are areas that we are focused on, essentially networking and security coming together, making
Mm.
sure that like you shouldn't have to think too much about that. That doesn't mean necessarily we are solving for all of those problems ourselves. Some are through partners, but essentially providing a very easy button, right? One customer came to us recently and said, hey, I have a AI service sitting in one cloud, and my data is distributed between my on-prem data center and one of the other cloud providers. I just want these three endpoints to talk to each other. Don't make me build pavements and roads and build highways and so forth.
Mhm.
Just make sure these three endpoints can talk to each other, right? And so simplifying these type of models in this new world that we are living in actually is extremely important. So those are some of the things that we have already been working on, and we are able to amp up to the next level, driven by some of the new innovations.
Brilliant. And how does a procurement and delivery look these days? How close are we to one click to buy and a few minutes or hours to deploy? Is that a realistic, or what say you?
Yeah, no, we'll separate the deployment conversation from the
Hmm.
procurement conversation, right? The
Mm.
procurement conversation honestly has gotten a whole lot better.
Mm.
If you're going through, let's say, cloud marketplaces and so forth, then you can literally, just like you buy on Amazon.com, you should be able to get stuff off of cloud marketplaces and start utilizing them. To us, honestly, we get surprised positively by the fact that some enterprise goes to marketplace, places an order, they get an automatic confirmation, and they're on our platform. And by the time we wake up in the morning and look at it, like they've onboarded a whole bunch of things, then they started to use the platform, right? And so that's a huge testament to the value. Now, that's not just from the procurement standpoint, but also enabling and operations as well, right? So embracing the world of as a service in its entirety helps us with that. Now, the tricky part is how do you do as a service, but at the same time give customers full operational control? Because as a
Mm.
service generally tends to be someone else's problem. you handle all of that, you give me an SLA, and then you handle all of that, right? But in the networking world, since there's data involved, there is actual transit involved, and so forth. Enterprises want to keep control of that. So having those elements in their control but being delivered as a service and taken care of as a service is actually a tricky problem. Fortunately, those are foundational things that we built into the platform, and that has helped quite a bit. To us, really, the testament is, can somebody, maybe let's listen to one of our webinars in the digital realm, go directly to a cloud marketplace, launch the platform and the portal, onboard a whole bunch of network applications and whatnot, and start to use them without giving us a call. And we have actually seen quite a few of those guys do it. So it's definitely heading in
Fantastic. Well,
that
that's
direction.
unheard of, even
Yeah.
that. So well done. Um, it's a fantastic time to be in the networking and cloud space. You've seen so much change and disruption every day. Probably would need a whole nother episode to talk about Juniper's potential acquisition by HP. But is it a great time to be an entrepreneur in this space? What's your advice to other founders, aspiring founders out there looking to dive into infrastructure? Not for the faint of heart, right?
Yeah, no, startup is not for everyone. It does require a certain a certain level of mental tenaciousness, I would say, right, or
Mhm.
tenacity. So you have to. It's always a good time if you think you have a problem that others really want you to solve, and if you feel like the forces of gravity is going to push things in a certain direction, you really have only two choices. You can wait and have somebody else solve it, or you can solve it by yourself.
Mm.
And when you reach that point where you have identified a problem, you are losing sleep over it, and at the same time you feel forces of gravity are going to push it in a certain direction, then no better time for you to step up and be the entrepreneur, right? But before you take a dollar from someone else, investors and whatnot, have the conviction, because this is a conviction game. Many
Mm.
times during my previous startup and also the current one, even though you're extremely bullish about what you do and customers are
Mm.
telling you things, you're in the doldrums for a few hours, right? And at that time, everything gets tested. So you need to have the conviction is what really pulls you out of that. Like, the reason why you are doing this is not so that you have a startup and you can it's financially great, right? It's not. You have to have the conviction to go solve a problem, because that passion, when you are on the whiteboard trying to solve this with somebody who cares about it a lot, that comes about really, really well. So when you reach that point, no better person to start a company and do it than yourself. So that's the only advice I would offer.
A wonderful advice, wonderful enthusiasm. We're right in start of 2024. Excited about any trips or travel events coming up? What's on your radar, your
Yeah,
calendar?
no, absolutely. So this year is packed for us. A lot of focus a couple of years ago was in the US market. Last year we did win quite a few EU based customers, so naturally
Mm.
expanding out to that region. We're still kind of confining it to these two regions for right now, but lots of trips planned. I love getting into conversations with customers, getting our hands dirty and doing whiteboards and so forth. Because the one interesting thing I've seen, Evan, is the infrastructure buyer in particular, irrespective of the level of seniority, I've seen tend to be a fair more technical than many others I've seen in the past.
Mm.
And so you need to be able to kind of appeal intellectually and commercially to that mindset. And so those are things I look forward to. And then along the way, you learn a lot. Some of your assumptions get tested, and then you're like, what was I thinking even coming up with something like this, right? Or why is the team working on something like this? And so it's great to be out there meeting with the customers, partners, and making them whole.
Wonderfully exciting. Thanks so much for all the insights shared and your time. Of course, I learned a lot. I'm sure the viewers did as well. And thanks for watching, everyone. Reach out to Prosimo on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all the places this video will appear. And take care, Ramesh.
Wonderful. Evan, thanks for all that you do. I do watch your show and podcast regularly, and you bring out the best crew out there. So that's
Oh, thanks
wonderful.
so much. Much appreciated.